Hey folks, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Let's talk bugs today. Well, it's super humid. I almost can't wear my glasses because they're all fogged up. But yeah, when we look at our garden in the spring and it gets to this point where we're starting to harvest food and have some real hope that we're going to have a real bountiful year, it all looks nice out there, lush and green, but I want to go and take you on a closer look and let's get down to the small level and see what we find. One thing I find here is that red moth. That red moth that's flying around, it's a squash vine borer beetle. I mean a squash vine borer moth right there. And I've got a lot of them out here. She's looking for a place to lay some eggs. Not a lot you can do about that at this point, but I'm going to harvest. We'll get a harvest out of these, and that's encouraging to me. So we get some squash. That's good. Before the vine borers destroy everything, we'll have some food. And I can already see some of their damage down in here. I'll take you in here and we'll take a look in a minute. When a squash fruit does not get pollinated, it turns into a little rotten thing like this. You don't have blossom end rot. That's just a non-pollinated squash plant. So you don't have to worry about that too much. There's the vine borer moth. This is the one that causes all the damage. And they're hard to catch, but if you can fold them up like so, well, I missed her. There she is. That's what they look like. That is the culprit. Let's see if we can get this one. Yep, well, at least it damaged her. There's a hole there. You can see the vine borers are active. Check this out. They do. The larvae, they bore in. And there's a larva in that hole now, so yeah, that squash is gonna have a hard time. So, success this year. We were able to beat the squash vine borer, at least for one harvest. And that's all I'm looking for in my area, because these plants will be in decline very soon. Now here's an interesting thing. Here I have a squash plant. I believe that it's some sort of a zucchini that came up voluntarily. And I don't see any vine borer damage here or on its leaves. I don't see any signs of vine borers anywhere. There are a few cucumber beetles around here, and there's some cucumber beetle damage here and there, but no borers. And that's because this plant is isolated. It's on the side of my house where typically I have not grown squash. This came up voluntarily by the compost pile, and it looks like it's going to bear a lot of fruit, although those are all male flowers right now. But yeah, if you isolate things, there's your case for crop rotation. You have a little bit better luck. All right, Phoebe. You been chasing critters? Good dog. The squash vine borer moth life cycle is that the pupa, let's start with the pupa stage because that's the overwintering stage. And that pupa grows down in the soil. Wherever you've planted some squash, well, there's probably squash vine borer pupas in the soil. When spring comes and the warmth causes those moths to emerge, they come out of that little cocoon under the ground, and you got these red, beautiful moths flying around. Well, they look lovely, but they're dangerous to your plants. What they're going to do is the mother is going to lay eggs on the leaves and stems of your squash, and you can go in there and pick those eggs off. They're just little brown specks, a little shy of a millimeter wide, and they're kind of flat. Well, those eggs will hatch and the larva will drop down and find itself a place on a stem, and it'll bore a hole into that stem, and that larva will begin to eat. It's a worm, a caterpillar, and it will begin to eat inside that stem and destroy that part of the plant. If you get enough of them, your whole plants are going to die. So that's what usually happens to me here on the Texas coast here in Zone 9A. The vine borers come and really decimate my squash plants. Now, the way I handle it is, well, I just plant squash early, and I hope to get 1 or 2 harvests of squash The squash right now is growing, probably get a week's worth of food out of it, and that's it. Then these plants will be decimated by the moth, the borer moths. I'll pull them out and I'll put something else in its place, something unrelated to squash. I'm going to probably plant peppers, and I'm going to plant eggplants in here. So yeah, that's what happens in this area with that squash. That's my biggest pest of the squash. But I have another pest too. Got cucumber beetles. Dozens and dozens of them every time I go out. Let's walk around and see if we can't find some. There is a culprit. That guy right there, that's well, he just flew off. That is a banded cucumber beetle. There is an unusual form of a spotted cucumber beetle. I've never seen one that color. They're pretty, aren't they? The cucumber beetle is a small beetle, about 4 to 5 millimeters long, and they're pretty. I like to look at them. They're nice looking, and yeah, they're lovely little bugs. But the cucumber beetle is dangerous to your plants because, well, not only do they gnaw on the leaves and cause unsightly looking leaf damage, but they can also spread things like bacterial wilt and mosaic virus. They are a vector for those diseases that you don't want in your garden. So it's good to try to take care of the cucumber beetles as best you can. Cucumber beetles are pretty hard to catch because they're pretty flighty. So if you see one, they're kind of already on alert. But that's the best way, I think, to handle them, unless you've got a gigantic infestation. When I first noticed the cucumber beetles in my garden, they were in my beans and on my cucumbers. They do prefer certain plants over others. They love beans, and they love cucurbits like cucumbers and squash. They're all over my squash. They've caused a lot of unsightly damage, and I don't want them spreading these diseases. So, prior to my beans blossoming, I sprayed those beans with a solution of pyrethrin insecticide, which is an organic insecticide, and it tended to knock back those bugs pretty good. I came back the next day, I didn't see any. So that handled them for a while. Now pyrethrins, you don't want to spray when there's blossoms on because pyrethrins are toxic to bees as well. They pretty much knock out anything that comes along. So now that I've got blossoms there, I can't spray that stuff. And don't worry, pyrethrins are very quickly broken down by the sun. They're not very stable, they don't last long. So, 2-3 days is all you're going to get out of an application of pyrethrin insecticide. And really that's all you want, because you don't want it to just sit there and keep killing, because all the good bugs in your garden, they're going to benefit, or they're going to get hit by it too, and we don't want that. I have a bee working the beans. It's a solitary bee. I think it's maybe a carpenter bee. He's going around gathering up pollen. So when you see that the good bugs are out, the pollinators are out, and boy, we need pollinators. When you see them out, you don't want to spray for your pests at that time, because you'll be knocking out the pollinators too. And so it's not a good idea to use any kind of spray when you have flowers like this, because most organic insecticides are not very selective. They'll just kill whatever comes along. The ideal situation in a garden is that you have a balance of good predatory bugs along with your bad bugs. And if you're spraying insecticides all the time, and you're always trying to treat for every single bug, you're going to knock out your good bugs too. And those are the bugs that keep the other ones in check. The reality we as gardeners have to come to terms with is there's always going to be bug damage in the garden. You're always going to have some pest pressure. That's nature. It's how nature works. And the things that we grow in our garden are not like the tough weeds out there. They're not like the grass. They're not native plants. These have been bred to be very specialized plants, and as specialized plants that fruit and make big fruit, well, they're weak. They're not adapted to survival in the tough real life world that they get planted in. So there's going to be bug damage, and you're going to have to deal with it. I'm not seeing a lot of damage on my beans just yet, but there are signs that I've got some slugs and snails. When you see little round holes, especially on the lower parts of your plants, that's usually mollusk damage. Snails and slugs are always going to be in my garden because I've got real organic soil, heavy on mulch on top, and they live down in that mulch, and they come up and munch on your baby plants and on all that fresh stuff you put out there. And they don't do too much damage. If you have slug and snail damage that you just can't tolerate, it's getting too much, then you can use iron phosphate pellets. They come in different brand names like Sluggo, but it's just iron phosphate. It's a natural addition that you put out in pellet form, and the slugs and snails will munch on that, and it'll knock their numbers back significantly. It doesn't harm your garden. It's not dangerous to anyone else, not dangerous to kids and pets. Iron phosphate pellets are wonderful to keep the snails and the slugs in check. One year when I had wood mulch on my garden, we had tons and tons of giant slugs, and yeah, they just bred in that stuff. So I had to use the iron phosphate pellets to keep them in check, and that worked pretty well. But again, you're going to have plenty of mollusks in your garden running around. Did you know you're also going to have crustaceans in your garden? There is a crustacean, specifically as you go down the kingdom phylum class. As you get down further, it's an isopod, and we know them here as doodle bugs. You might know them as roly-polies, pill bugs, sow bugs. They're all the same kind of isopod class. They're those little bugs. They're cute. They roll up, and they live in the detritus, in the decaying matter in your garden. Now, those are usually beneficial insects, or they're not insects, beneficial critters. They're usually beneficial because they break stuff down. They're some of the primary decomposers in your garden, and they usually stick to a diet of decomposing matter. But occasionally, if you plant something and it's a tender little fresh green, like these beans here or lettuce, occasionally they will decide they're going to munch on your plants. You have to make the decision to tolerate that, because these bugs are good bugs for the most part. While they can be pests, once your plants get up and growing and they're strong, the pill bugs will leave them alone. There's your roly-poly right there. See how they roll up like that? Yeah, these little fellas, that's generally what they eat. That is generally all they eat, is this compost and decaying material. But occasionally they will munch on your greens. But these are good guys. The pill bug, roly-poly, doodle bug, whatever you want to call it, we call them doodle bugs. They also have the unique ability to isolate and remove heavy metals from your soil. If you got some contamination in your soil, there's something about those bugs, when they eat that stuff, it comes out inert. So that's good. They're accumulators of those toxins. There's another pest that I have to deal with in my garden, in my area, and that's the fire ant. When fire ants decide they're going to make a home in your garden bed itself, man, sometimes that's a real hassle. Those fire ants, they put a whooping on you. If you get into them, you don't know it, and next thing you know, you've got dozens of bites all over you, and they sting. And yeah, fire ants are no fun. What makes them so deadly is you can get into fire ants, and tons of fire ants can crawl up on you without stinging you. And when the first one stings, it sends out a pheromone, and they all tend to sting you at the same time. That's why it feels like fire. It literally feels like fire. So when I find fire ants in my garden, if they're in a place where I'm not, working in, I generally just leave them be. But when they're in my garden itself, somehow you got to get rid of them. In the past, I have found that there's only one product that I've used that really killed fire ants. Most ant baits and ant poisons don't work on fire ants. You have to get stuff that's made for fire ants. And I used to use Amdro, which is a pellet, and you can spot treat Amdro on those fire ant mounds, and they'll be gone in a couple of days. The problem is I don't want that stuff in my garden itself. So if I have fire ant mounds in the lawn, or say under my grapevines, I'll sometimes use Amdro, but I've learned you can use orange oil in solution. Orange oil will kill them on contact. Now, there is concern about orange oil being toxic to dogs, and well, I've got a dog, so I did some research, and really the orange oil is only toxic to dogs if they ingest it in great quantities. And this stuff's going to be soaked down into the ground, and I don't think it's going to pose any problems at all. So I've purchased some orange oil. I'm going to see if it works. All right, right here at the base of this grapevine, I've got fire ants, and just disturbing those leaves, I can see I've stirred them up. Here's the stuff I'm using for the ants. This is orange oil. It's just straight up orange oil, cold pressed orange oil from the rinds of oranges, and so it's natural. It's biodegradable. It does have some toxicity to obviously ants, but I don't want my dog going digging around in that either, but she doesn't seem to show any interest in it, so that's good. But orange oil, I think it works. Yep, fire ants. Lots of them. Just going to spray this orange oil, saturate that mound, and I can see that they are visibly slowing down. yeah, they're slowing down for sure. Come back and check on them later and see what's happened here. Those ants are definitely dying. They're unable to swarm. I've saturated that earth with this orange oil, and looks like it's working. The test will be to see if this mound gets re-inhabited in the next few days. What you'll find with fire ants is that if they have a well-established underground tunnel system and you kill them off, whether with this stuff or with any kind of insecticide, that after a while, even years later, that a new colony will move into the same ant hill or network underground. So we'll see. This has been a trouble spot for a couple of years now. It looks like we might have knocked this mound back a bit. There are some benefits to leaving your weeds behind. This weed in particular has been targeted by some sort of pest. Well, if that pest is going to stay on these weeds, I'll leave this weed behind, and those like it. And I'll leave them behind until just about now, when I start to see flower heads, because that's how these weeds will reseed themselves. But they serve as sort of a trap crop, and you can intentionally plant a trap crop. A trap crop means some sort of sacrificial crop that you grow that is more attractive to the particular kind of insects that you're trying to target, and they'll go to that crop and leave your others alone. That's the theory, and it's been proven over and over that it works pretty well. There are lots of other kinds of pests that I've had to deal with in my garden. This year I've had to deal with different kinds of caterpillars. Almost all caterpillars are going to be chewing animals, and they can decimate a plant really quickly. I know that there are folks that like to relocate caterpillars because they turn into beautiful butterflies and moths, but my friends, caterpillars will destroy your garden. You got to deal with them, at least remove them. I come out at night and hunt for caterpillars with a UV light that will make the tomato hornworm grow, and I haven't seen any, although I have had a couple of caterpillars in my safflower, and I did find a big munching caterpillar on my tomatoes, but it wasn't a hornworm. Caterpillars are generally easy to treat. You hand pick them, or if you've got a lot of them, you can treat with neem oil. A neem oil spray will cause those caterpillars to munch on those leaves, ingest that neem oil. They won't be able to feed anymore and they'll die. There are other sprays that are natural, BT, spinosad, these all control caterpillars, but they also control other things. So you might want to just take the simple approach with neem oil first and hand picking so you don't wipe out your good bug population. We've had trouble with spider mites in the past. I've got a whole video on spider mites, so you can go watch that video up there. If you see spider mites, you got to deal with them right away. They can spread through a garden in a matter of days. They decimate your plants. They totally destroy everything they come in contact with. Spider mites are no fun. My peppers almost always get leaf miner damage, and they do a pretty good number on the pepper plants, but the peppers tend to survive quite well regardless. And so I never really do anything about leaf miners. Leaf miners are usually outpaced by the growth of the plant, and so I don't worry about them too much. But they are unsightly. They're not pretty. But what are you going to do? So thanks for joining me today on Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. Hopefully you've been educated a little bit about some of the pests you might encounter, and hopefully you know what to do about them now. And well, if you like our video, please share it and follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our channel. That's a very encouraging thing when we get subscriptions. We invite you to join us. We'll talk to you next time. Happy gardening. Bye-bye.